Welcome, everyone. Welcome to all of our attendees joining us from all over the world. One first housekeeping information to everyone. We will record the session as always, and we will send around the link to the recording, probably later today, at the latest tomorrow. So if you're not able to be with us until the very end, you will be able to watch the recording afterwards. Today, our guest is Tony Pillitiere. Please, Tony, introduce yourself shortly.
How you doing? I'm Tony P. I'm the co-founder for Horizon 3. I'm in Wesley Chapel, Florida, and it's beautiful and it's sunny. I know it's afternoon for you guys, but the sun is just now coming up for us. So I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, probably much better weather than we do have here in Europe. It's freezing cold.
Oh yeah,
But still,
I came to Florida because it's nice and warm.
I can totally understand that. Okay, so everyone, the Q&A section is open. So if you do have any specific questions to Tony, please feel free to type it into our Q&A section. I will address it either during Tony's presentation or at the Q&A section afterwards. So Tony, tell us, why is hacking yourself the new place to be, or the place to do, or the thing to do in cybersecurity for the future?
Yeah, I'll kind of start with the origin story of the company. I spent 21 years in the military, in the U.S. military, and uh, most of that time was in kind of black world organizations. But what that really means is selectively manned units with highly sensitive mission sets. And my twilight position was as the Deputy Chief Technology Officer for the Joint Special Operations Command. And we were doing some really cool stuff there. And part of my responsibility was cybersecurity. And I grew up in 25 years in IT operations. I grew up doing IT operations. I was a network engineer, network architect, doing IT ops, doing defense, doing some offense because I wanted to understand what it was that I was defending against. Um, Automation was kind of my shtick, even in the U.S. military, where everybody's like, "Oh, you got big budgets." Yeah, we got big budgets, but we don't have a lot of people, and we don't have a lot of people resources. So automation became kind of my thing to help, you know, leave a place better than I left it, and also leave it better than I left it for a longer period of time by leaving automations behind. And I went to the cybersecurity organization in JSOC and I said, so let's talk about the priorities. What are your priorities? And they listed 500 things. And I said, well, if everything is a priority, then nothing is a priority, is kind of how it boiled down. And we said, okay, let's bring in the NSA Red Team to do an assessment on us to understand where do we sit and where should we shift our priorities. And the whole organization did really well. People, process, technology, they did really, really good. But they did find some things that an attacker could take advantage of right now. So great, there's our priority list. Let's fix those, find mechanisms, policies, strategies to prevent those types of things from coming in again. NSA team, can you come back in 3 months, verify that we fixed those, and then move to the next section of the environment? Because when you have manual pen testers, you have them come in and assessment teams come in, so that it doesn't take an exorbitant amount of time or doesn't cost you, it doesn't cost you an exorbitant amount of money. You're going to narrow their scope. Okay, I want you to stay focused on, this right here. Let's do these individual things, right? I said, we'll bring you back after 3 months, verify that we fixed those, and then go to the next set, find more, help us find these things that attackers can take advantage of. And they laughed at me. They said, no way, you don't have the budget, we don't have the resources for it. It'll take 3 months to coordinate. We'll see you again in a year or a year and a half. I said, okay, fine. Took all that back to the CTO, who is now my co-founder, Snehal Antani, who was a guest on your show some time ago. I told him what happened, and he said, "Can you automate that?" And I laughed at him. I was like, "No, You can't audit this hacking stuff, man. That's creativity and inference and uh, for orchestrating multiple data sets together, orchestrating different tactics and techniques, and connecting the dots between. As I'm explaining why you can't do it, I was like, you know what? I really don't know if you can do this or not. So I spent the next 45 nights laying in bed next to my wife, trying to figure out how do I organically maneuver. How do we create a system that organically maneuvers the way an attacker does, to bring to me an understanding of the things an attacker could take advantage of right now? And I got it to work. I didn't want breach and attack simulation. I didn't want pre-scripted attack paths. I didn't want packet replays. I didn't want vulnerability scanning, which is just looking for signatures and has to have authoritative access to a system. I wanted it to take the context of my environment, the way an attacker, the way a pen tester, the way malware does, and I wanted it to be simple to use. I wanted to do it all by itself. I didn't want to have to interact with it. And it worked. Being the super nerd that I am, I put together, I had Dell servers and Exchange servers and SolarWinds and SQL, and I had all these like enterprise things that I was using for testing and working, in the unit that I was working in, like to just play with it because I'm a super nerd and I wanted to get more familiar with it. And I found some things that I was not expecting to find. Now, I came from 25 years of IT operations, but I'm not a on-net hacker. So I took it to folks on my team who are, and I said, "Here, check this out." And they're like, "Oh my God, this is amazing. There's something here. This is incredible. We wish we would have had it." And I said, "I know. I wish I would have had it as an IT operator. I could have pushed a button and understood that this was important. These other ones are not." So I took that to Snehal, and he loves to show this text message, but he sent me a text message that said, "Congratulations, you won the lottery. We're going to start a company." That was in July of 2019. In October, we formally formed. And now fast forward 4.5 years later, 50,000 assessments later, uh, over 4 years across thousands of organizations, um, we are shifting the mindset and we're shifting the way cybersecurity is looked at. We're shifting this industry, and it's just been an incredible, incredible ride. We've built autonomous penetration testing. We've built this a mechanism that makes offensive security accessible to more and all organizations. And it is the future of cybersecurity. So that's the origin story. I want to start kind of my talk, and I know we've kind of gone good amount of time already, but that's a good way to start and understand why we built what we built, why we've done what we've done, because I needed a better way to prioritize. I had resource constraints. I had a large, continuously shifting organization, continuously shifting landscape. And when I say landscape, I'm not just talking about my internal IT ops sprawl or my internal attack surface or my external attack surface. I'm also talking about the people on the inside. I'm also talking about the criminals and the threat actors on the outside. They also have a play in this, right? So that's always continuously shifting. This isn't anything we don't already know. I'm assuming most of the folks in this call and who are listening to this they all understand those things, right? But the talk that I give and what I want to go into now is what I call an offense to inform defense philosophy. This is not about me selling my product or anything like that. This is about shifting your mindset to thinking about your environment through the eyes of the attacker and prioritizing based on what an attacker will take advantage of within your environment. And it starts with a story about an organization who has a board of directors who is very keen on cybersecurity. It's important to them. They have a CISO. They have a separate IT operations team from their cybersecurity team. They have EDR. They got a SIEM. They have automated patch management, vulnerability scanning. They have all these bits and pieces that make them feel, and that made the CISO feel that he was he was fairly secure, and he had reduced his risk to a comfortable place. In 2020, zero logon comes out. Let me switch my. There we go. In 2020, zero logon comes out. For those of you who are not aware, zero logon is one of the nastiest Active Directory domain controller exploits in ever. It's really one command and you have full domain compromise. All you need is access to the domain controller. And Microsoft did what they do. They put out an emergency patch, and the defensive team took that patch, dropped it in their automated patch management system, and patch ran. After the patch ran on all the domain controllers, they ran a vulnerability scan. Vulnerability scan said everything was good. So now they feel patched. Good. 18 months later, they bring in Node Zero. They bring in our company, our product, to do a proof of value, which is essentially a free pen test. And on the very first operation, Node Zero in the output, in the report, showed that it exploited 6 of their 10 domain controllers using the zero logon exploit. And the CISO comes to me. He said, Tony, this is no good. You say you don't do false positives. False positives are a bad word for you. This is a false positive. I patched that. I said, oh, no. It's in the report. Here is the proof. That's the thing that offensive security folks give you. Your pen testers, your the red teamers. They come in, they perform the exploitation, and they show you and prove to you that something bad is possible because we were able to do it. And he goes, oh yeah, you're right. So he takes it back to his team, and what ended up happening, he came back to us and he goes, we figured it out. When they ran that patch, what actually happened was they took the patch, dropped it in their automated patch management system. The automated patch management system targeted the domain controllers. It executed the binary on the domain controllers, and when the binary executed, it updated the registry, updated the patch level. But when it actually went to do the thing that makes it not vulnerable, Cylance blocked it. Those you're not tracking, Cylance is a ML-based endpoint detection or AV tool that uses machine learning to determine if there's an anomaly, it will block it. Well, from Cylance's perspective, this was anomalous behavior, a binary being executed to make changes to a domain controller. It thought that was off, and it blocked it. And then the patch executed, or the patch exited. There was logs in the patch management software and the automated patch management software, but nobody caught it. So for 18 months, this organization was at risk, significant risk, to zero log on one of the nastiest domain controller weaknesses that's been out. And what he came back to me and he said, this is amazing. First, I'm going to buy the product. Second, he said, this is one of my favorite quotes. He said, I've been doing Patch Tuesday my entire career. You guys just created Pen Test Wednesday. And you'll hear us say Pen Test Wednesday in some of our collateral and some of our marketing stuff. That wasn't something that we came up with. That was something that he came up with when he said that. So I already kind of talked about who I am, so I'll skip that part. What I want to continue to go through today is this idea of attention is all you need. And then I'll talk a little bit about a false sense of security and how that organization had a false sense of security. And then if we have time at the end, there is no perimeter is kind of the topic that I'll go over. And we'll talk through, hopefully that's not new. And with the work from home and the pandemic and the push from threat actors on landing on the inside via phishing and other means, that the perimeter is not something you should always rely on. And defense in depth is something we've been talking about for a really long time. We'll talk about some of the DBIR data as well.
Tony, before you start the story, we have already one question from an anonymous attendee. Anyway, does that mean that the identified vulnerabilities are actually exploited, and does that exploits are actually run against the tested infrastructure? would be interested to see the tech stack and the tool set which is used to automatically run the exploits.
Yeah, so I can answer that right now. One, no, this Node Zero specifically runs in production. Yeah, this is not on test infrastructure. Unless you're asking if we do it in test infrastructure previously. Yes, we do. We have to make sure that those aren't going to like the exploits that we build or the exploits that we use, the tools that we use aren't going to knock things over. Yes, but from our organizations run this in production during peak hours. And the reason they do that is because hope is not a strategy. And I'll go into this in here as well. The idea that you can spin up a test environment and do it in your like test and do exploits in your staging environment and then deploy to your production and it's going to be the same is a fallacy. That's not true. And if a malformed packet and or a unknowing user on the inside can disrupt your value stream so bad that it brings you down and halts your operations, or a threat actor can do it, you would much rather want to know that when you have control over it versus when a threat actor or you don't know what's going on. So that's why our organizations like to leverage this, this capability during peak hours, during in production systems. And yes, it does actually perform the exploits. Uh, that's the only way that you understand likelihood. We'll talk about that. So
And
in
the tech stack, can you run one sentence about the tech stack, the tools Node Zero is using?
Yeah, so I didn't recreate Nmap. I didn't recreate the same tools and attack capabilities that that attackers and pen testers are using. The I wrapped them in a service and I taught the service. Our bread and butter is the decision making and the understanding and the data model that we created to understand the context of the environment that we're operating in. So um, it uses Nmap, it uses Responder, it uses NNDE facts, it uses crackmap exec, it uses hashcat, it uses all the same tools and capabilities that pen testers are going to be using anyhow. The system knows how to use them, when to use them, and in what configuration to use them to serve its purposes.
And automatically or autonomously, not manually. So that's what was the
Correct.
second question. Yeah.
Correct. This is completely autonomous. There's no humans in the loop. We do eventually want to build a capability that allows Node Zero to like hand off the shells or allow a MSSP, an MSP, a pen tester, a red teamer to interact with it as it's operating. But for now, we've seen so much value for the autonomous nature of it, and it makes it accessible to more organizations. That's kind of where we've landed for the time being. But it is on the roadmap. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep, I'm gonna speed through this because I gave the kind of the origin story too. In 2017, a group of Google researchers came out with this. They put out a paper called "Attention is All You Need," and in that paper, it describes this thing called a transformer. And what a transformer is a mechanism that allows algorithms to understand context of the input. And to kind of describe that, if I say the phrase "not penetration testing your organization on a regular basis is detrimental to cybersecurity," if we forget about the word "not," that completely changes the meaning of that sentence. And that's how LLMs and generative AI, that's how it works. It pays attention to the context of the input that is provided to it. And this paradigm shift of paying attention to what matters and focusing on what matters is what has enabled this AI revolution that is generative AI. Now, what does it have to do with cybersecurity? Prioritization is absolutely paramount, and things are changing on such a rapid such a rapid rate that humans cannot keep up. The future is algorithms versus algorithms, and we have too many things, too many balls to juggle to stay up on it. So there are resource constraints. Even if we were to continue to hire, even if we have our own red teams, and even if we have more people resources, that still means there's more technical resources that are required, and that still means more attack surface. And there's like this race condition that makes it more and more difficult for us to keep up in this rat race of offense versus defense. So the mindset of shifting to an offense to inform defense philosophy and a strategy flips that upside down and looks at it from a different angle, and allows us to focus and prioritize and pay attention to what really matters, and that's what an attacker can take advantage of in our environment. I have this phrase, this idea that our risk calculation is flawed. And for those of you who don't know, the risk calculation is likelihood times impact. And I say that to be somewhat to like poke and prod at it. I don't think likelihood times impact is wrong. I don't think the calculation for risk is wrong. What I believe and what I've realized as I was creating this system and building this company, that the data that we are using to determine risk is wrong. What do I mean by that? Let's take a look at our vulnerability scanners. Right now, most people have a vulnerability scanner as kind of part of their foundational security stack. Does that give you likelihood? Now everybody will say yes. In CVSS, it talks about the likelihood of, that's part of that calculation of how they rate that particular weakness. Yes, but is that in the context of my environment? And the answer is no. It doesn't really know. Your vulnerability scanners don't really know if that has likelihood or what the likelihood of that is in the context of your environment, because it doesn't try or attempt to exploit it. So you're getting knots on trees. So you got this big forest, and you're getting an understanding and a zoomed in look at, this is a potential hole in my environment. What in your security stack tells you impact? Nothing. Everything is there as roadblocks in the middle of a field at night without a flashlight. And we hope, we're using hope as a strategy, that an attacker cannot maneuver through there. And the only way we know our actual risk is when an attacker gets in the environment, or we bring in pen testers, or we bring in an offensive capability that performs the exploitation, understands what can happen from that exploitation, and what can an attacker do after it performs that exploitation. Exploitation itself, that's like a super cool word, and we talk about hacking stuff and all that, but it's not about the exploitation. Exploitation is a means to an impact, and every attacker has their objective. It's either get to domain compromise, it's to disrupt business operations, it is to extract value from your organization. So we have to pay attention to the ones that are most impactful and have the highest risk. And if we don't get that from our security stack now, how have we been calculating risk for the last 40 years? I'm not saying that we don't run vulnerability scanners and we don't want to fix all of our risk. But what happens is that, like, I know nobody in this call and nobody listening, nobody in the world has reduced their risk to absolute zero. The only way to do that is to turn everything off and shut your business down. But that doesn't really work out. What's happening is we're focusing on the criticals and the highs, and we never get to the mediums and we never get to the lows. Meanwhile, attackers are on the other side of your environment, chaining together lows, mediums, misconfigurations, default credentials, and using tactics that don't even show up as part of your CVEs. You hope your security stack is doing what it's supposed to do, but they're maneuvering around, they're finding credentials, excuse me, and they're logging into your crown jewels data and walking out scot-free without you even knowing about it. Excuse me. So how do we overcome that? We overcome that by taking the offensive approach to our environments, by maneuvering the way an attacker would, and tuning our tools and adjusting the way that we operate so that we are focused on the things that matter. This leads me to the next story that I'll kind of shorten a little bit. And the story is about a brand new director of IT operations that just got pulled into a healthcare clinic. And he He came to me and he said, "Hey, I'm going into this new job. In the fine print, I'm the director of IT operations. I got 4 people for this 20,000 endpoint environment. They're all IT operators. I don't have a defensive team. I don't know what my defenses look like." He was a former Marine and he had an offense to inform defense type mindset. He said, "I know what you're working on." This is early on in the development of Node Zero. We didn't even have a front end at the time. And he said, "I want you to come in. I don't care where it's at. Just run it. I want to understand my environment, and I want to know where I need to prioritize and focus." Did not have budget, had nothing. He just said, "Just come in here and run it." I said, "Okay." So we ran it. The outcome of that was in the whole engagement took 45 minutes. So Node Zero ran, we pushed a button, Node Zero did its thing, and it ran for a total of 45 minutes. In the first 15 minutes, we were able to gain access to full database access to the EHR. This is all of the healthcare records for all of their patients. 1.5 billion records. From a HIPAA standpoint, that's a fine per record. We had full access to the prescription management software using a default credential that they didn't even know about. We could have written scripts for Vicodin and Percocet and walked in and picked them up. The MSSP called them 90 minutes after we started. So 90 minutes after we started. So the engagement ran for 45 minutes. 45 minutes later, they called him and said, "We think you're being scanned." Think about that. Think about that. There were no logs, no alerts, no blocks. Node Zero ran free. Nobody was none. They were none the wiser. He was excited. He was excited that he understood, and he had the understanding from his standpoint on where he needed to focus his priorities as he was moving into this role. And that allowed him to go to the board, and they gave him immediate increase in budget. He presented them an understanding that if and when an attacker lands inside our environment, these are the impacts, likelihood, and impact. He got an immediate increase in budget, and he said, "I'm going to buy your product," which is good for me. And they're still a customer to this day. They run hundreds of pen tests a year. Immediate increase in personnel. He was able to renegotiate the SLA with his MSSP, and he eventually fired that MSSP to get a different MSSP that worked better in an offense to inform defensive strategy, and was willing to work with him on running Node Zero and understanding and being able to like spar with this offensive security capability that he now had. He came into it with an offense to inform defense philosophy. It allowed him to present to his executives a mechanism, the impact and the outcomes that will happen if an attacker is to land. And we all know that, well, I've seen reports just lately as of today that 60% of organizations in this survey of thousands and thousands of organizations have been breached. They all are SOC 2 compliant. They all have their risk management frameworks. They're all running NIST. They're all DORA and GDPR, and they have all of these compliance capabilities, but they're still being breached. And they're still, they have this crunchy outside, because that's where compliance usually kind of stays and where it focuses on, and where we want to make sure that we got this fortress around our crown jewels. I hate that term, but. And then they got a squishy inside because we're not more continuously understanding how an attacker is going to attack us and our environment and our configurations. All right, so what do we got? A couple more minutes, Lars?
Go ahead.
Okay. The first organization we talked about, that story that I told, they had a false sense of security. You have risk, you have unknown risk. That's bad. You have known risk. That's less bad. What's the only worse one than those two is risk that you thought you mitigated, but you didn't. They had this false sense of security. If you think about, on average, organizations have 26 different tools within their security stack. And because these organizations, because the people can't do all these things manually, they can't go through logs manually, they can't bounce from tool to tool to tool and stay up and kind of correlate across all these pieces. We rely on those tools to do what it is that they do. And I have seen in many cases, the defensive team is spending more time managing their tools than they are actually defending the network. And going through and looking at and correlating data together and doing tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Not many organizations have the ability to do tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 type approaches to analyzing the data. They have their tier 1 analysts are doing everything, but they're also managing the tools. Now I want you to think about, you got 26 tools on average. Think about the number of configuration differences. That is a monumental number. Changing one checkbox over here, now I have to understand, how did that one checkbox affect the rest of my other tools and how they're operating, and how did that affect how my posture is actually standing up? Good story to go with that, and kind of solidify that. We had added some new attack content, and for about a week or so, this organization, they were running probably 3 to 4 pen tests a week, and across multiple parts of their environment. And he called us and he said, "Hey, you guys put this new attack content in, it's so awesome, and it keeps getting me. Node Zero keeps finding 6,000 credentials and getting domain admin. My EDR should have been stopping that." We're like, okay, let's see what we can figure out. Here's kind of in the fix actions where we talk about you need to set these pieces, but we don't go into like the details of each individual EDR. Well, we go into his EDR. He's doing a screen share with us, and we said, "Oh yeah, see that checkbox? Check that box. One checkbox." He runs a test, 0 credentials, no domain admin. And he goes, I just want to see what happens when I uncheck it again. I said, okay. So he unchecks it, runs another pen test, 6,000 credentials, domain admin. One checkbox is the difference between an attacker being able to capture 6,000 credentials and get to domain admin or not. If that's the case on one checkbox, what happens when you have 2 checkboxes? What happens when you have 4 checkboxes? 8, 16, 32, 64. Ad infinitum with all of your security tools. The only way to understand if your defenses are going to hold up to an attacker is to send an attacker at your defenses. But those things they're expensive. Think about the logs. Are your logs logging? Are they, when an attacker is maneuvering, you have all these this telemetry coming in, is it doing what it's supposed to? Is it being used for the right alerts? When an attacker initiates those tactics and techniques and procedures, do those alerts fire? And if you're just alerting, do those alerts turn into blocks and stopping things? If you're just tracking that an attacker is maneuvering through your environment and stopping and destroying your environment, ransoming everything, exfilling data, if it's just watching it, what's the value of that? You need it to be stopping those things so that an attacker cannot maneuver, cannot bring these chains together, chaining lows, mediums, and misconfigurations. You're understanding the telemetry from all of those tactics to block those things. Using the offense to inform defense philosophy and attacking yourself on a more regular basis, you are able to trigger those alerts. You're able to initiate and have those logs generate. You're able to validate that your stack configuration is doing what you intend it to do. Is your EDR blocking? Is your SIEM seaming? Is your XDR doing the XDR things? Otherwise, you have roadblocks that you've put up, and you're blind to really understand, can an attacker maneuver through it? And you hope that they can't. So how do we overcome this? We bring in pen testers. But when we bring in pen testers, we narrow their scope because they're expensive. There's only so many of them. I love pen testers and red teamers, and I love the offset community, but there are only so many of them. And we want to narrow the time to look at our entire environment, but we can't because that's just too much. So in order to keep the cost and the time frames appropriate, we narrow them to our crown jewels. and we focus them on the fortress that we've wrapped around all the things that we think are important to us. And what do? Okay, they come in, they're gonna bang up against this brick wall that you've put in front of them. Meanwhile, they know that they could be over here scanning this other side of the environment, chaining these other pieces together, and they don't have to do fancy exploits. They can just log in and bypass all of the controls that you've put in place, because now they are acting as an actual user, because you've been paying attention to just those crown jewels and not the other parts of the environment. Vulnerability scanners are knots on trees. Penetration testers are a set of trees in the forest, having some mechanism to look at the entire forest to connect the data and the weaknesses from one side of the environment to the other, to then validate that you can or cannot log into your crown jewels, is hugely important. Hugely important. All right.
So
Go
Tony,
ahead. Another
we
question?
have two questions. Yes, yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
From Achim, the first one. Can you explain the playbook of the tool a little bit? So what are the single steps, scans, activities of the automated hacking procedure?
Yeah, so the way the system operates, the way you're describing it, and I think the way the question is being asked, is what is the play-by-play? And that's not how the system operates. The system operates, yes, there are some initial steps that every attacker, every pen tester, even our system is going to take. The first thing that happens is just to kind of describe the architecture, and we can put this thing on hold. I can talk about it a little bit because there seems to be some interest in it. It's a SaaS-based product. Every time you push run a pen test, or you schedule via the API, or you're running this regularly scheduled engagement within your environment, either externally or internally, or in your cloud, or wherever you want to put it, every operation or engagement or pen test spins up an ephemeral architecture that is just for that pen test. And you think about the ephemeral architecture in the cloud as kind of the brains of the operation. This is where all of the decision making happens. This is where the context, we understand, the system learns the context of the environment through what we call the cyber terrain map. And the cyber terrain map is not it's not a physical or logical topology of the environment. It is a time series graph that that is the connectivity between the different pieces of data that Node Zero or the attacker has been able to find and enumerate. So when we start, the brain is blank. It doesn't know anything. It doesn't know anything about the environment. It just knows, okay, I have landed in an assumed breach scenario, let's say, and we're landed on the inside. I now know that where I'm at in the world. I am this IP address, I am on this site, or here are the things that I have right near me. That goes to the brain. The brain now goes, okay, I don't know anything. The first thing I need to do is I need to do a host discovery. I need to perform enumeration. So then it performs enumeration. It's using ZMap, it's using Nmap, it's using DNS tools, it's using all the same functionality and same capabilities, some that you might be using, some you might not be using. And it gathers up as much context about the next step, which is host discovery, and then it goes into service enumeration, and then it goes into host, goes deeper into from there. When I say I don't know where it goes from there, what I mean by that, what that means is it depends on the context of the environment. So if the way the whole system runs is I ask the environment questions, whether through a ping, an Nmap, NSC script, or some tactics, some exploit, some post exploitation, whatever the case may be. I take the information back. I now update my context, the cyber terrain map, with that new information. Because that was updated, I can now perform the next set of analysis. I take the next set of analysis and I decide the next actions to take. So it all depends on what the environment looks like. That's how attackers operate. That's how pen testers operate. That's how malware operates. That's how threat actors in general are going to operate with your environment. They don't know how they're going to maneuver until they're in there maneuvering and they understand what they see at every step of the way. I hope that answers the question.
For me, it would. Maybe Achim, you can. Yes, okay, perfect. But
Good.
there is a follow-up question already from
Mm-hmm.
Achim. And following to that, how do you ensure that these kind of automated scans are not knocking over some system by accident, as some system would be very wimpy when it comes to scanning, or even more when it comes to exploitation of vulnerabilities?
Yeah, let's take Bluekeep for instance. Bluekeep is a very well known exploit. We find it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. It's still out there. A lot of organizations are still using Windows 7, Windows 10 to for these old systems, and they just can't patch it. It's a thing. It is a risk that organizations accept. Um, we do have it will exploit Bluekeep, but you can turn those things off. So we give the user control of the things of the exploits and the tactics that may be, depending on the environment, may be a little bit more risky for them. And we give you the opportunity to turn those off. So like Bluekeep, it's off by default, but in 50,000 pen tests, I've never heard of our exploit for Bluekeep actually knocking over or blue screen in a box. And for Bluekeep specifically, there's like a configuration that is required for that exploit to actually blue screen it, and it's not as common as you think. So yeah, we do our testing. If you go, you can go to the page right now and sign up for a free trial, and you get a sample op. That sample op has a bunch of data in the report, and you can peruse through it and see all the different types of things that we do. It's not everything, but it's a good swath of it. It's not fake data that runs every night in what we call the cyber range. And it's kind of our smoke test op to make sure that we haven't done any regressions. You can take a look at some of the things in there. And the configuration allows you to turn tactics off. Like if you don't want to do DNS brute force, your organization has a very wimpy DNS server on the inside. You don't want to do DNS brute forcing, you can turn that off.
Perfect. One more question.
Mhm.
Does Node Zero make it completely unnecessary to monitor CVEs?
No, that's not the case. Like I said earlier, the intent is not to work towards reducing your risk to zero. It's not the intent. The intent here is to prioritize and focus on the ones that matter most right now, because an attacker can take advantage of them right now. Node Zero is an infrastructure penetration test. We do Active Directory. We do some OWASP top 10 stuff. The point is prioritization and fixing what matters most so that you're moving the needle. You still want to, I mean, obviously patching is a huge component of cybersecurity. You want to patch, you want to keep things patched and updated, but we know that you don't have time. I spent 25 years in IT operations. I spent half that time saying this is a false positive, this is a false positive. The module in that CVE, the module that's mentioned in that CVE isn't even present on the system. Why am I wasting my time focusing on this when I have printers I got to keep printing, and I have routers and switches I need to continue to upgrade and expand the environment and get, it allows organizations to better prioritize and focus on what matters.
Okay, perfect. All questions answered for now. If you attendees, if you do have any additional ones, to keep posting them. 15 minutes left, Tony.
Okay, I'll go. Yeah, do you want to ask questions, or
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So in the 2023 DBIR data, it was no surprise to us. So it really should be to anybody, that most threat actors, the majority of them, are financially motivated criminals that are starting outside of the perimeter and breaching and breaching. That's where most of the breaches came from in the breach data. The title of the point that I'm going into is there is no perimeter. Perimeter is a fallacy. We have to assume breach always. And why do I talk about this? Because when I say they're external actors, well, if they're external actors, they have to come in from the outside. So I need to focus on my perimeter. Yeah, but how are they making their way in? shocker, shocker, same as like the last 5 years, phishing has been the most effective way that that threat actors are making their way on the inside. They will land on the inside. They will. And if you have a crunchy outside but a squishy inside, and you don't have the layers of defenses on the inside, there is no perimeter. We have to. I'm hoping that that's not something that's new, and we all understand that. How are they getting around? Well, what are they doing from their phish credentials? From the phish credentials, they're either phishing credentials, or I'm sorry, from phishing, they're either phishing credentials or they're finding stolen credentials and they're using the phish to get a foothold on the inside. They're landing as that user, or they're landing as system on that particular box that user has. And now they are authenticated. They have some set of credentials that they can use on the inside. And unless you have user behavior analytics, and I have yet to see a functional, useful implementation of UBA. I have not seen it. If somebody has a functional and useful implementation of user behavior analytics, I would love to have a conversation with you and see how you did it, because the amount of data that is required, in theory, this UBA will overcome a lot of problems, but really help us like target maneuvers, lateral movement, but I have yet to see one that is actually useful. That is actually useful. Anyhow, I'm going on a tangent there. They're looking for credentials. Node zero attackers, threat actors love to find credentials. I don't have to do fancy exploits if I already have the password to log in. If you have your credential reuse is a thing that happens all of the time. If you have, some weakness within the environment that allows you to that allows node zero or a threat actor to dump credentials, but you're like, it's just the admin for that thing, and that's not really that important, and it doesn't lead them anywhere. But that admin password is the same admin password you use all over the place, and somebody else just happened to use it as their domain admin. I say this because it happens, and it happens all the time. I just had a conversation with an organization last week about it. Now the attacker is maneuvering the way a user would, and it's much, much more difficult to find unless you have continuously assessed yourself and you know that this is the paths that an attacker is going to take within my environment. Ransomware is still huge. It is still huge. If you take, but what is for us, and I'm going to skip it because we're kind of getting at time. For us, our philosophy is ransomware is an outcome, not a malware. If that's interesting and intriguing to you, let's have another conversation about it. Hit me up and we'll talk through it. And then Log4Shell. I'm not going to talk about Log4Shell. Takes a little bit long. The key takeaways of kind of everything that I'm talking about right now is, one, I'm not here to sell you my product. I'm here to sell you the philosophy of an offense to inform defense and how you should be hacking yourself more often. But the key takeaways are prioritization is paramount. And the way things are shifting, if you're not focusing on what matters and you're not paying attention to the things, to the context of your environment, you're wasting your time and you're not actually moving the needle towards better security. Our risk calculation, likelihood times impact, requires likelihood, requires impact, and requires context of your environment. Otherwise, you're not prioritizing appropriately. Always, thank you, baby. Always assume breach. That should be one of the main, that should be a perspective that you understand about your environment. Yes, you want to check from the outside too. Absolutely. But you also want to understand, how do things happen from this perspective, on an assume breach perspective? How does things happen from a supply chain perspective? Do I have connectivity from my suppliers inside? What happens if I get breached from that area? What does that look like? Perspective also matters. Hack yourself often. Go hack yourself. Hack yourself often. Use the offense to inform defense philosophy to understand your environment the way an attacker will understand it, so that you can prioritize your fixes, prioritize your shifts in your defensive tools and your capabilities, so that you're improving your defenses. And offense, and finally, like to sum it all up, an offense to inform defense is far more effective than a defense to inform defense. So I meant to end there. Period. Thank you.
So one question, or yeah, one first question to you, Tony. How does Node Zero actually prioritize the findings? How does it do this in detail? Does it use the CVEs or context, and how does it use the context?
Yeah, like I said, context matters. And the way that you're going to get, let's say a pen tester comes in or an attacker or a red team comes in, they're going to give you a report on at the end. And the report isn't like individual pieces of the pen test. It is a roll-up understanding of the impact that they were able to have or they could prove is possible within your environment. Node Zero operates in exactly the same way. From a CVE standpoint, we find like LLM&R, it's just an easy one to describe. MBTNS, LLM&R, these things that enable man in the middle, they are usually set up at the base score for this. Let me forget about those. Let's talk about SMB signing. This is something that is on by default within Windows organizations. It's not something people think about. It's not a CVE. It's enabled within the environment. There's a base score that we've kind of given it based on how NVD does their scoring. So we give it a base score of like a 1. But because Node Zero would be able to leverage an individual instance of that weakness to make its path to domain admin, is it still a 1 now? If that's what enabled a domain compromise, if that's what enabled ransomware exposure, if that's what enabled, pick your impact, should it still be a 1? No. In your vulnerability scanners, it's not going to change. It is what it is, and it is based on the theory of the things that they see. But what we can do now with Node Zero and with pen testers or with this offense approach, you get to narrow down into the individual instance of these weaknesses and then raise the context scores, what we call it. So what started as a 1 has now been raised to a 10 because it led to domain compromise. And it was what enabled 16, 25, 100 other paths to other impacts that raises that context score. And this is where you should be focusing. That's a choke point in the attack chain that allows you to pinpoint the most effective thing to fix right now that will have the biggest impact in my environment. And even in the portal, it will show you 33% of downstream impacts started from this weakness. You should fix this first. That's all in the portal. So that's how we contextualize. It's all based on downstream impact. Yeah.
Yeah, more or less finding the low-hanging fruits, doing the stuff that really matters, no matter what other people or other organizations prioritize it for. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, and one last question, because I know I saw a couple of people joining also from large organizations who also have a red team. So how do your customers usually, the red teams of your customers usually interact with Node Zero? What are the approaches here? Short answer, please.
There's two different approaches in how you use Node Zero. For organizations who don't have a defensive team or they don't have an offensive team, it's Node Zero, help me do the things, help me identify stuff. I will then fix it, verify it. For organizations with an offensive capability or MSSPs or MSPs who want to find a differentiation for themselves, they use Node Zero as a tool in their toolbox. The way I like to describe it for pen testers and offensive folks specifically is you don't manually craft a packet to enumerate a service. You use Nmap. Is that cheating? No, that's efficiency. Think about Node Zero as a mechanism, as your like Nmap for the entire attack chain. We're going to perform the same steps throughout the entire attack chain. We're going to dump credentials. We're going to try and leverage those credentials. We're going to do all of those components and boil it down at machine speed and at machine scale so that you can now focus on the outputs and say, that's interesting, that's interesting. Node Zero isn't going to find absolutely everything. There's no pen tester in the world that's going to find everything. There's no tool that's going to find everything. You can go, I think that's interesting. I'm going to start where Node Zero left off, because it was able to find this weakness. And I'm going to dive in and I'm going to try some other things that I normally do. And then we love the feedback from pen testers and red teams. Understand what is the context in which you did this new thing? What are the tools and the commands that you used? And what would the output look like? Then we take that and we put that into the product. So now Node Zero does the same things that you're doing in the same context. So it's always a conversation, and I love working with pen testers and red teamers who want to accelerate and reduce the boring stuff so that they can focus on the cool stuff.
Okay, Tony, perfect. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all the attendees joining us today. If you want to learn more about Horizon 3, about Node Zero, please reach out to Andy or to myself. We're more than happy to schedule a demo, send out additional information or whatever you're up to. As I already mentioned, we will send out the link to the recording later today or at the latest tomorrow. And then I would like to highlight some events that are upcoming. There will be one additional webinar before the summer break, probably in the mid of June. It will cover an interesting topic. It will cover asset management, which is, from our conversations, one thing that is still unsolved in many organizations. We will be joining the MySecurity event in Zurich. I'm not sure if one of the folks here also plan to attend, so it would be great to meet you there. And we are plan to go to ITSA, to the German IT security fair in Nuremberg in October. So it would also be great to meet you guys there. And now it's 2 minutes before the official end. Thank you to everyone. Thank you for joining. Thanks for your time, and have a great evening, morning, afternoon, whatever. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks for having me, Lars. See you, everybody.
Bye bye.